So hello, and a very, very, very warm welcome to this course, this new course, this next course in my Zoom teachings. And it's such an important one. And I was surprised myself that looking back over the last couple of years that I hadn't done it already. One of those strange things. I thought, I'm sure I must have done this because it's such a basic, important, wonderful topic. Then I realized I hadn't. We did do a Tonglen retreat at one point in the courses, but not 7 points mind training. So it's a very joyful, very meaningful thing for me to have the opportunity to present this course. And I think we all need to start as we do, which is by this very, very precious moment, remembering our bodhicitta, remembering what this life's highest possibility is, which is service. It's to become less and less self-centered and more someone able to help everybody else, to realize this insanity of not feeling part of everyone, of having separated ourselves from the whole community of living conscious beings. And all of that sickness of ego that causes all the problems everywhere, to realize the insanity, the stupidity, the sickness of that, and to realize that our mind can be full of love and compassion and such wise care for everyone, and everyone includes ourselves. It's not a journey of self-punishment. It's a journey of becoming who we truly are, which is Buddha. Our mind, the truth of ourselves, is so beautiful, so meaningful, so profound. And it is pure love and pure clarity of mind. We can call it wisdom, but it's more than wisdom. It's total clarity of knowing that's who we really are. And it would be such a shame if we died before we realized that. Made it real. Realize means make real. Before we made that real. So our moments together in these Dharma studies are about this journey that we're on, to do our best, to move along this path, this wonderful journey of awakening, which is that of the bodhisattva. So we stop everything, we stop our worldly mind, and with all of our heart, as much energy, as much as you can muster, then we say our prayers, and as most of you here know, we do them in English so that we know what we're saying. But what we're doing in English is what many of you are used to doing in Tibetan, in centers, where you don't know what you're saying unless you're a Tibetan speaker or you're learning Tibetan. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on until we reach the very heart of enlightenment, through our practice of generosity and all 6 transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality, to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every one of those beings be well. May they live long and be healthy. May they be well provided for and have good friends May they find respect. May they live in places of peace and plenty, and most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for those good circumstances to be their wealth in future lives. May they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being that's totally beyond suffering and attain great equanimity, free of closeness or distance from anyone. Deyata shame shamawati shameta shatrumam kuri marajite ka ore tejuvati oloyane pishuda nimale malapa naye kukure kaka grase grasana omuki paramuki amuki shametani sawa graha bandhanane nigrihidva sawa pava prawadina vimukta marapasha satapita buddha mudra anugatita sava mare butsarita parishude biga shantu sava marakama. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our heads on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness, ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and that we are one. So, as I said, a very, very warm welcome to this 7-point mind training course, which is wonderful in so many ways. And what we found at Samiling over the decades is that of all the teachings, and in particular of all the bodhisattva teachings, this is the one which really works the best in life, in helping people become bodhisattvas, but also at the time of death when people applied this in our Samiling community. It showed, and the feedback we got sometimes from the nursing staff in hospitals where people usually die, and so on, was they said, we've not seen people end their lives like this. It's special. So it's a great honor and a pleasure for me to transmit these teachings. I first received them in 1977, I think, from the previous Jamgon Kongtrul Rinpoche, and I've received them various times since from our wonderful Kagyu masters. Always when we start a course, we zoom in to see where we are in the biggest context of all. So we're Buddhists, I think, more or less, and means we're practicing Dharma, the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha's teaching falls into two main areas. There's what the Buddha himself taught during the 45 years of his teachings, and which is summed up in the Tibetan collection in over 100 texts. And, it's a teaching given here, a teaching given at the request of this person and that person, is not at all systematized. The Buddha taught according to the person asking him, trying not to get too deviated, but in the first year after the Buddha's enlightenment, then one teacher called Mahakashyapa came to him. He was a very accomplished yogi. He had 5,000 followers, and they all converted to Dharma. They were great meditators. They've been meditating all for years, and their leader, Mahakashyapa, had amazing meditation accomplishment. So, of course, Buddha taught him like he would teach somebody with a lot of meditation experience and experiences and so on. Then other people were beginners, and then sometimes he went to towns, people would gather. So he gave all sorts of teachings, not at all within a system. So we have that, and the collection of all of that in general is called sutra, although when we look at it in itself, it falls into three collections, the three baskets, the Tripitaka, which are sutra and Abhidhamma and Vinaya. So that's what the Buddha gave. Abhidhamma is all the technical teachings he gave about mind and matter, and then Vinaya are the rules for the Sangha and precepts. It's all about keeping discipline, and then Dhamma are the general, not Dhamma, Sutra in the three baskets is mainly about meditation instruction, mainly, roughly. So those three, the Tripitaka, altogether are also called sutra, the Buddha's own teachings, very precious from the source. And then the other area is Shastra. After the Buddha and up to the present day, then wonderful minds, very learned minds, very wise minds, have taken the Buddha's teaching. They've not given something new, but they've taken the Buddha's teaching, they've organized it, they've presented all of his teachings on this or on that, on karma, on whatever. They've organized it and they've commented on it, explained it. So those are all called Shastra, or explanatory texts. They're not really commentaries, although some people say commentaries, but they're not. A commentary is you have the original text and you comment on it, idea by idea. These are much more global. These are their analyses of the Buddha's teachings, and very often presenting the understanding of the time or their particular tradition of the Buddha's teachings. So these are the Shastra. In Tibetan Buddhism, when we study Shastra, then we study two areas of Shastra. Indian Shastras, like Shantideva's Bodhisattvas, living Bodhisattva's way of life. It's very famously been translated into English as that. The Indian Shastras by the Indian masters, but then the Tibetan Shastras by Tibetan masters as well. So here we are studying it's quite interesting, a Tibetan Shastra, a Tibetan explanatory text based on the teachings of an Indian master, Atisha. So very generally, that's what we're doing. We're looking at the Tibetan Shastra of somebody called Se Chilbu, who put into writing the teachings of his teacher, Chekawa Yesi Dorje, who was a spiritual grandson or something like that of the very great master Atisha, who gave many teachings in Tibet that were condensed into the one that we were going to start to study. So we're going to look at that. When this text is taught, one has to look at, first of all, where it sits, so I've explained that, and then we have to look at the qualities of the master who taught it, the idea being the better the teacher, the better the text. And in the past, it's not like today where anybody can print anything. Anybody can write a book. In Buddhist monasteries, the only things that were allowed to be published, I mean, we're not talking really about printing and publishing, but to be written down for other people to study, the only things that were allowed to do that had to pass through a board of censors and be approved. And if a work wasn't good enough, sometimes the writer who wanted to, or whose work was being, so they were punished by the king, not by the monastery. Monasteries didn't punish people, but the king's duty was to punish on the monastic level. So anyway, and some kings in Tibet were very strict about this and about the whole area of study. But anyway, when we look at texts, we look at the qualities of the teacher. Were they a bodhisattva? Did they live a sacred life? Were they a bodhisattva who'd achieved this or that bodhisattva level? Were they an emanation of a certain Buddha? And so on, how they were seen by Tibetans, so we can appreciate their life and their work. So here we're looking at original teachings from a master who brought Dharma to Tibet in the sort of 11th century, around that time. And his name was Atisha. His Dharma name was Dipamkara. And so it means light, lamp of the teachings. Atisha, Dipamkara. He, in terms of Tibetan Buddhism, is bigger than big. So important. And so to understand his importance, we'll look a bit at his story, but those of you who've registered for this course, you've received support documentation. There is the life of Atisha from a Gelugpa source. He's very big in their tradition as well as in our Kagyu tradition. And you'll see more details about Atisha's life. Here, it's an official biography. For me, it gets interesting when he leaves India. The first bit about his life and his parents and the kingdom, it sounds to me too much that they want to make him look like a second Buddha. His parents were from Bengal, Vanga it was called at the time, and when it describes how their palace was, and it looks a bit over the top. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's true. Who am I to say? But it looks a bit over the top, and it looks like it's been written to convince people about what a big deal he was in his younger life, like Buddha Shakyamuni. But anyway, the fuller version is there for you to read. But before we look at Atisha, we need to understand something about Tibet and Tibetan Buddhism, because if you're like many of us are here, we've given our lives to Tibetan Buddhist practice. Often we're part of a Tibetan Buddhist organization, we belong to Dharma centers and so on. It's healthy to know where what we're doing comes from. So a very, very quick trip, I hope 5 or 10 minutes, because it's so fascinating and it's so important. And I want to cram it into 5 or 10 minutes when it could be a whole course. But anyway, let me try to be succinct. Buddhism didn't really get to Tibet until the 7th century. It got to Tibet in the 7th century through a king called Songtsen Gampo. Like the famous later Indian king, Ashoka, very, very famous in Buddhism, Indian Buddhism, Songtsen Gampo was a warrior. in the first part of his life, and a very, very successful warrior, he made, for the first time, a Tibetan kingdom. Tibet was many small kingdoms, we call them that, whatever you want to call it, warlords, kings, but it was many small areas of influence under different leaders. Songtsen Gampo not only unified all of that under his army, but he went out, he conquered other Himalayan kingdoms and about a third of what we now call China. It wasn't China at the time. It was sort of China, sort of Mongolia. That history is complicated. I'm not going to touch it even. But what we now call China, a third of that was under Songtsen Gampo's rule. But let's not think too much about it. When you conquer all of that, it involves a lot of armies and bloodshed and gory stuff. But like Ashoka, who was the first king to unify India militarily with a lot of gory stuff, in the second half of his life, Songtsen Gampo civilized Tibet. He wanted to bring culture in all of its forms, including Buddha Dharma, to Tibet. And he put all of, the Tibetan Empire was rich at the time. When you're rich and you conquer other countries, you plunder their wealth. So he was very rich. And he did things, one thing, he wanted the best medicine for Tibet. So he sent envoys out to find really excellent doctors as far as Greece, as far as Russia, into Persia, into China, into India. And he made a 2-year conference where all these doctors were together discussing their knowledge so that he could get the best medicine for Tibet. This was really the first foundation of traditional Tibetan medicine. And then he wanted Dharma for Tibet. And so he sent one of his best ministers called Tummi Sambota. He thought, we have a Tibetan language, but we don't have a written language and grammar. So he sent him to India to get a language for Tibet, get characters, get a grammar, and so on, which Tummi Sambota did and brought back so they could translate the Dharma texts. So Songtsen Gampo did a lot to bring Dharma to Tibet. That's where it really started. But he was up against the local shamanistic religion called Burn, and a lot of his ministers and assistants were still basically belonging to that kind of belief. So he couldn't do a widespread transformation of the whole Tibetan Empire into Buddhism. That had to wait till the 8th century, when a king called Trisong Detsen invited India's greatest guru of the time, called Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, and one of India's greatest scholars, Shantarakshita, to come to Tibet. And there they built the great monastery Samye, the first big monastery. They built many monasteries. And there, Tibet, as it was a century later, not quite so big, but still a huge and unified country, became Buddhist. It was illustrious. It had royal money, the most powerful Siddha guru of India, Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, and a really very thoroughly learned, masterful scholar, Shantirakshita. And then other masters came too. There was a huge, huge implantation of Dharma. Children, hundreds of children were sent to India to train in the language, to come back and be translators. It was, the whole royal power was behind it. Fantastic. So that's sort of very famous, the time of Guru Rinpoche and Dharma coming to Tibet. So we don't have time to look at it, but what Dharma went to Tibet and so on. And which tantric teachings went to Tibet. Fantastic, wonderful. But it only lasted 44 years. By the 44 years later, a king called Langdama, which means bull's horns, who was Bumpo, destroyed Buddhism. He sent the lamas and the monks out of the kingdom, and he re-established the shamanistic tradition, Bumpo, not like Bumpo is today. Over the last, 1,300 years, Bumpo has integrated a lot of Tibetan teachings, claiming them to be, Buddhist teachings, claiming them to be its own. But that's another story too. And you get things today like Bumpo Dzogchen, which is weird, to say the least. So anyway, Dharma destroyed. This wonderful Dharma and hundreds of translators and monasteries, texts, everything destroyed. And then, so after Langdama, who was assassinated, Dharma trickled back, but it really did trickle back. So then, that was the 8th century. We fast forward to the 11th century when something incredible happened. Who knows why? It's almost as though great minds, great bodhisattvas, great beings knew that India would disappear from its homeland, India, soon. So there were Indian masters who went to Tibet. There were Tibetans who went to India to get the teachings. In the 11th century, there was a tremendous restoration of Buddhism in Tibet. So that's called the New Buddhism. In Tibetan, New is Sar. So it's called the Sarma wave. And actually, there were 7 major traditions of Buddhism that went from India to Tibet. Over the centuries, these integrated, fused into one another. And so these days, we've got there were 4 major Buddhist traditions in Tibet, which many of you know. So Kagyu, the Nyingma, the Gelugpa, and the Shakapa. So anyway, all that history is interesting, but the important thing is in the 11th century, then that's when this huge wave of restoration. Now, the biggest figure in that was Atisha. And from Atisha and from his tradition, then that aspect of the restoration of the 11th century is called the Kadam. Ka means Buddha's teaching, Dham means pure. So it's like the purest wave, wanting to come back to an original purity, Kadampa, happened. And that Kadampa teaching was received in our Kagyu tradition by Gampopa. Very vital part of all of what Gampopa was, what he did, and what he, as the father of our Kagyu tradition, the Kadampa aspect of Gampopa's knowledge and teachings that he transmitted is absolutely vital. So let's go back again to Atisha, from whom this came. And I won't give you all of Atisha's life story, just some of it. So he was a prince. He didn't want the princely life like Buddha. His parents, like Buddha's parents, very much wanted him to take over the kingdom. He was actually the middle one of three sons. Often it's the eldest son who takes over the kingdom. But he was the brightest, shiniest, most powerful, obvious one. If his dad could get him to take over the kingdom would be all right. So there's a lot of pressure on him to get married. They found him a wife, and it was only on the eve of the wedding, it's like some Hollywood movie, that he managed to get out of the wedding the next day. And he kept going off and wanting to be a monk. So there's all the stories about how he goes off, the teachers he meets, the renunciation. And so it's his parents were very stubborn. And in the end, in the story, wherever he goes, they always send about 100 people to look after him. He's kind of got minders or bodyguards of the youth of his country. So wherever he goes, they go. And so in the end, he's obliged to park himself as a yogi meditator near the palace and to act very crazily, till in the end his parents have to think he's lost the plot. There's no way we can get back that lovely son we had. So then they let him go. And he goes first to a monastery called Odantapuri. Now, there were many Buddhist monasteries in India, many Buddhist Vajrayana monasteries that were famous, but the three most famous were Nalanda, Vikramashila, and Odantapuri. They were all pretty close to Bodh Gaya, seen from afar. Nalanda was famous, but by the time of I've gone blank on his name. I've got one of those old age moments. Who are we talking about? That's terrible. Anyway, by the time he by the time he was around, then Nalanda was kind of old and a bit faded. In Vajrayana terms, Vikramashila was the place, very, very vibrant and so on. And then there was a third one called Odantapuri, smaller scale, but top, like these days you've got Harvard, Oxford, and MIT, famous universities. In the Buddhist world, then these three were very famous. So first, just a second, this is stupid to forget a name like that. It happens. Atisha, of course. Oops, I've lost you. Atisha was at Odantapuri. And now the interesting thing about Atisha's life, he became one of India's greatest scholars. At a time when scholarity covered lots of things, the Mahayana philosophical traditions about shunyata had really reached a lot of maturity. They weren't new on the block. They'd been debated, taught, thought about. People had practiced them. So Nagarjuna's teachings and the Sangha's teachings and so on were very well understood. Prajnaparamita, all of this, very well mastered. And then the various tantras and their teachings, very well mastered. So in terms of understanding shunyata, the nature of mind and all of that, Atisha was as informed, and he'd practiced all of that as anybody, as much as anybody. But when it came to what will I do with my life, then he listened to his yidam, which was Tara. So there's this sort of next level. I wanted to share that with you because for me it's very important. There's a lot of academic stuff in Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of talk about the nature of mind, a lot of talk about prajnaparamita, shunyata, and nothing exists in its own right, and all of that. So you understand your mind is like a dream, and the essence of mind is whatever it is. There's all that blah, blah, blah stuff. And people get off on it and they think they understand it. But there's a kind of a next level, which is yidams, Buddha's manifestations, Chenrezig, Tara, Mahakala, Medicine Buddha, all of those, hundreds, thousands of them that gave rise to the Tantras. So Atisha, top reference, is what happens from the essence of mind itself intuitively through visions of Tara. Not his own think, work it out logically, apply prajnaparamita and all the rest of it. The deep, powerful, that you can't ignore guidance that comes from, in his case, his yidam Tara. So at one point he hears, he's at Bodh Gaya, circumambulating the great stupa, and there are many carvings in the stupa of bodhisattvas, and he hears two of them talking. It's kind of, you say, what happens when you meditate? You hear stone statues talking. So either you're crazy or you're a good meditator. But anyway, he hears them talking about how there's such a need to understand bodhicitta. So the long and the short of it is, you'll read the details in his story. The person in the whole known Buddhist world who was most famous as a master of bodhicitta was somebody, in English his name means Lord of the Golden Isle, who was somewhere southeast of India. So it depends on the research that people have done. It's not clear. It looks like it was in what we call Indonesia these days. So this master, who had been a Vikramashila, that's where he became famous as the holder of the Bodhisattva teachings, he'd gone off to teach, to be probably in Indonesia, although some researchers say no, it wasn't that far. It could have been southern Burma, blah, 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 academic research. But anyway, he was a long way away and you needed to go there by boat. And so Atisha accompanied, he's still got these 100 companions or more with him, who in the meantime have become Buddhist disciples, his Buddhist followers. He's their teacher. They all set off in a boat to go to Indonesia, to the Lord of the Golden Isle. And so then there's a story, how much that story has been embellished by time, by storytellers, but it took them, it seems, 13 months of boat journeys, one, possibly two shipwrecks to get there. That's a long time. It's a long time, 13 months, more than a year. But anyway, he gets to, let's call it Indonesia. He gets there, and to his, the one he wants to learn from, he spends a couple of weeks having landed, finding out about the teacher, and then for the next 12 years, he takes teachings, and, well, we don't know everything he learned, but for 12 years, this already very learned person. In fact, when we look in his biography, he said one of his problems is that he knew he was very, very learned. He was kind of bright and knew the blah, 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 the theory, Buddhist theory, very, very well. One thing his teacher did was to teach him love and humility, to the extent that later on and throughout his life until his death, whenever he mentioned that teacher's name, he couldn't stop crying. He had been shown what a bodhisattva really is. The beauty of loving service for everybody where you are nothing. It's indescribable. It's an experience that he learned from that teacher. And he was so moved by that, that although he had three very, very important gurus in his life, that one in Indonesia was the one who taught him how to really be a bodhisattva. But other than that, he taught him what we would call these days Mahamudra, Dzogchen. He awakened him totally to the nature of mind. So then, after 12 years, he goes back to India. There he goes to Vikramasila Monastery. He is very honored because he's the great sun shining in their sky of Buddhism. He's a very great master. So there he is, a great master in Vikramasila. Now let's go back to Tibet. What has happened in Tibet is that Tibet is in this time of its history. It's called the dispersed age, or this sort of scrappy age, when there was no Tibetan empire. Tibet had reverted to small kingdoms. It never became a unified kingdom, ever, after that. Even under the Dalai Lamas, although they had a lot of influence, in 1959, when the Chinese took over Tibet, it was 5 different kingdoms. And Dalai Lama was the king, virtual king of central Tibet. His influence extended further, but he wasn't the actual king. There were 5 kingdoms. So there's a period of Tibetan history which is called the scattered time, or the scrappy. And so now we're looking in Tibet. Tibet was big. The Tibetan plateau is 5 times the size of France. And it's all isolated valleys. It's a big, difficult to travel place. It's no wonder it's small kingdoms. It really isn't. So now we're focused in Western Tibet. And there was a king there who wanted to bring pure, good Dharma back to Tibet. And so he sent emissaries to Tibet, to India, to get good teachers. But the problem is they were Tibetans, and once they traveled across down from the Tibetan plateau, they got diseases. He sent a whole party. Only one of them survived, and he stayed in Vikramasila. He never got back. And then, so he sent him with offerings. In those days, you sent big offerings to invite teachers, a lot of gold. So he raised more gold, and the king decided to go himself next time. He'd heard by that time that Atisha was the guy he wanted. In all of India, if you want a really powerful Buddhist master, master of Tantra, master of Mahayana, master of everything, Atisha's the person. He'd learned that from a very famous translator. So he decided to go himself with the gold, which turned out to be not a good idea, because he got kidnapped by a Nepali king who put him in prison, kept the gold, and then sent back the equivalent of a ransom note to Tibet, to his kingdom, Yeshua's kingdom. So you can read all the story and the names and everything. Just keep it simple. He said, you can have your king back if you send his body weight in gold. Right? So then his nephew, who'd become king in his place, raised all the gold he could raise, and it said he had the equivalent of the king's weight, the previous king's weight, minus the head. So he had sort of torso, arms and legs, but not quite the king's weight. He thought, we can negotiate. He made the journey, and to get his uncle back. And the Nepali king wouldn't accept it. He said, no, I want all of the weight. And so then he was allowed to speak with his uncle, who was locked up in a miserable prison cell. And the uncle said, please don't go back to Tibet and raise more gold. I'm old. I've been badly treated here. I probably won't last much longer. Use the gold you've got to go to India and get Atisha to come. So then you'll read, it's a fascinating story, but you'll read how the journey continues, how the Tibetans got to Vikramasila, some of the emanations of Chinrezig they meet on the way as young boys, giving them advice and so on. And basically they're told you'll never get the Indians to release him. The monastery is no way is going to release Atisha, especially if you let them know that you want to take him back to Tibet. Whatever you do, don't let them know that you're after Atisha. So then they have to be undercover for a while. Eventually they get to invite Atisha. Now this is the thing. He says, I'm old already, and Tibet, I don't know. I'm of use here. Monastery needs me. And he said, let me think about it. So in his thinking about it, he gets inspired again by his yidam, Tara. And Tara says, it's up to you. If you go to Tibet, you'll bring great benefit. But you'll live 20 years less than if you stay here in India. So it's your choice. Shorter life and benefit Tibet, or longer life and stay here and bring the benefit you know you're giving at the moment. And there was no choice. I mean, he was, how can I say, he really was a bodhisattva. He didn't know the bodhisattva teachings. He was a bodhisattva. He was given 100% to benefiting humanity, benefiting Dharma as much as possible. His own life didn't matter. He knew, I have to go to Tibet then. And so they make different kind of ruses so that the monastery will let go of him. In the end, the monastery theoretically lets him go for 3 years, but you must promise to come back, in 3 years' time. It takes him 2 years of journeying to get to Tibet. He gets to Western Tibet, and there he's amazed, Atisha's amazed. Once he sees the monasteries, the texts they've got, he's got more texts than we've got back in India. And people, they've heard that Atisha's in Western Tibet, that he's coming there. People came from all over what we could now call Tibet. And the questions they were asking him were deep and subtle about the various tantras and philosophy. He said, well, I don't really know why you invited me. And then he made his way from Western Tibet towards Central Tibet. He got to the Samye monastery. And so the story goes. I'm not sure if it's that simple, but anyway, it's just me and my doubts. But anyway, he gets a guided tour of Samye. Now, Samye monastery was constructed basically on 3 levels representing the 3 yanas, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. And he gets a guided tour of the different levels with their different Buddha images and their different texts, and the great sort of Rinpoche who's guarding Samye tells him, this is the Mahayana, this is the Vajrayana. And then he says, now I know why I've come to Tibet. It's because they hadn't put it all together. They didn't see how Mahayana fits with basic Buddhism, Shravaka level. They saw those as 2 separate things. Like many people, when they look in Buddhist history, they see a split between Shravakas and Mahayana. They don't see them as part of a bigger picture. And then Vajrayana and Tantra, again, something else. So there was a lot of expertise in different tantras, but it had become a bit like deity worship. The big picture, the unified picture of Buddha's intention had been lost in Tibet. And what was really missing, lots of tantra and expert masters in the different tantra, but they'd lost the understanding that tantra will not produce what it's meant to produce unless there is a total bodhisattva mentality underpinning the Vajrayana practice. That was missing from Tibet. And so then Atisha spent the rest of his life in Tibet, and he, even though he was a great master of Tantra, he spent nearly all of his efforts and time re-establishing the purity of the Hinayana teachings and the bodhisattva message of the Mahayana teachings. And once they'd been revived, then, I'm thinking of the present reality here. It's a drought here. There are many plants that have died, and there are many plants that you have to water so much. You know what a plant looks like when it's desperate for water, when it's kind of all droopy and losing its color, and it's kind of on its last legs. And then you water it, and 5 or 6 hours later, it's kind of got itself back, come back from the brink. Through what Atisha did, through his incredible kindness, unimaginable kindness, he restored the very necessary foundations to Vajrayana. And so his Kadam, what emerged from him, was called Kadam, the purist movement. He brought the purity and the real message back to Dharma. Please read his life story, and especially about his translators and how in the end he meets up. Tara had prophesied there would be somebody in Tibet who would become his interpreter and who would carry on his lineage. That was Dromtempa. So now we come to our text. What happened? Well, when Atisha, remembered his name, when Atisha taught the bodhisattva teachings, it was, how can we say, wherever possible, from a place of Mahamudra, from a place of Dzogchen, where what we call absolute bodhicitta, the truth about reality, the truth about our mind, that you are Buddha, that I am Buddha, that everything is a manifestation of Buddha's pure lands. Wherever possible, he taught this not as words, not as ideas, as a transmission, as a Mahamudra pointing out the nature of mind, pointing out the nature of reality, the great awakening to what is called jhana. Changeless, primordial, utterly pure, totally loving and compassionate, absolutely peaceful forever Buddha mind. Now, that he taught as a secret teaching. So he didn't teach, as far as we know, we don't know, 7-point mind training. Whatever he taught that gave rise to the 7-point mind training, he taught under a seal of secrecy. Keep this to yourself. Only share this deepest truth of bodhicitta with those who are ready. Don't teach it publicly. Keep it as a most wonderful, powerful secret. But then he allowed, after so many generations, it can be made public. So if you go to your text that you've got now, so the text I sent out is the original for printing an A5 booklet. And Helen, thank you very much, Helen, recovered this into text as an A4 version that also I sent out. But we are looking at, once I get it back on screen, I've got a bit of problem here. There. Yeah. So you'll see the text is called Refining the Mind. Traditional teachings from the lineage of Palden Atisha, blah, 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 blah. Table of contents. And then when you get onto page 2, you'll see a summary of how Buddhism hit Tibet in a big way in the 7th and 8th centuries. There was this decline, and how in the 11th century it was restored. Then there's a little bit about Atisha's life story. And then when we get to page 4, it says Atisha's mind training gurus and heirs. So if you look, you'll see Atisha in India had 3 main gurus. One was called Dhammarakshita. The one in Indonesia was generally called Serlingpa, but Serling means Indonesia, so it's the Indonesian master, Serlingpa, His Dharma name seems to have been Dharmakirti Shri. There are lots of Dharmakirtis in Indian Buddhism, Indian Buddhist history. He was Dharmakirti Shri. And then he had another Indian guru called Kusali Jr. or Maitri Yogi. Those of you who know the story of the bodhisattva who took a dog suffering when somebody threw a stone at the dog, well, that was him, Kusali Jr. Anyway, now we get to Atisha, Dipamkara. Then you'll see in Tibet the person who became his main disciple and also who was during his life his interpreter was Dromtönpa. He held the secret transmission of what we now have as 7-point mind training. His disciple was Geshe Putoa, held the secret teachings. His disciple was Sharawa. He held the secret teachings. His disciple, Chekawa Yeshidoje, made a condensation of all of those secret bodhisattva teachings, or the whole kit. He made a condensation into 7 points, but which he never wrote down, which he taught himself. So it's his disciple, Seichilbu, who gives us this written text of the 7 points of mind training. Are we, whoops. I curse at computers sometimes. You lose your screen or you touch the wrong button and then... So, what do we need to do now? So far, so good? Yeah. So, there we've got now a text that we'll look at in a second. But what's the title? What's the title? Well, we call it mind training, but I always remember Taisitupa saying, I don't like that in English. Training, he says, sounds like training a dog. You got here, boy, fetch, sit, heel. There's you, and you've got a mind, and you're training your mind. He said it doesn't. So let's look at it a bit. So let's look at the Tibetan. It's Lo Lojong. Lo is one of these 3 Tibetan words that are all translated into English as mind. So Lo, yeah, let's just leave it as that, mind. Sometimes those 3 terms are interchangeable. Sometimes they've got specific resonance. Lo means intelligence. But in a very broad way, in a very deep way. Intelligence with a sort of, the word smart. When you say somebody's smart, they kind of, he's got that woke up feeling, they know what's going on. That kind of intelligence. Lo Jong. Jong is part of a verb that's got a root which has got many resonances. Part of it you can translate as training, in the sense of something you do again and again and again. But Jong also means to purify. And the participle Jang means purified. So, and there's several resonances with this word Jong. So it means working with the most intelligent, awakened, smart bit of yourself, again and again and again, to make it purer and purer, more and more awake. Lojong sounds like that in Tibetan. You're working on the very finest, best bit of yourself, and you know it's a work. So it's often compared, when it's explained, to gold. First you've got to separate gold from the ore, and then you treat it with chemicals, and then you get finer and finer abrasives, and then you even end up with cloth to polish it. Many, many steps that you end up with pure gold from gross ore. So that's sort of the idea, Lo Jong. But let's call it mind training, because everybody does. But you'll see the title of the booklet I made was Refining the Mind. I think that's a pretty good, if you have to choose just two terms, mind refining, that's as close as we can get to the Tibetan. Mind refining. Sounds funny. Anyway, mind training. Okay, so then we've got now Seichubu's version of Cheikowa Yeshidoji's 7 points. So all of Atisha's teachings are in 7 points. So now, what do I want to do? Okay, I've got to fiddle around with screens for a second. Yeah, good. I want to share the image I sent you. Can you see the image? Yeah? Mind map?
Yes, can see it.
Can see it. Good. Okay. So now I want to make it. So the 7 points are in 59 short verses. Right? This transmission as a text, not really as a text, as ideas, we have 59 key ideas arranged in 7 areas. For the structure of what we're embarking on, you need to know this. So I've made a mind map, looks a bit like an octopus, about this teaching. So the 7 points are the blue blobs, right? And then the 59, now sometimes it's 59 verses, sometimes it's 58. Over history, this sort of in different monasteries, in different places, you find tiny variations in the original text. But let's say 59 verses. They're distributed among these 7 points. And the 7 points you should know, you should learn. So first, the preliminaries, the basic need to know that all of this needs to rest upon what you must do first. Right? Preliminaries. There's one verse for that. Point 2 of the 7 is about the 2 aspects of bodhicitta, the awakening and the awakened mind. So ultimate bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta. We have 5 verses about ultimate bodhicitta, 5 verses of instruction, because this is all about practice. It's not blah, blah, blah Buddhism, this is practice Buddhism. How what we actually need to do. So 5 verses about ultimate bodhicitta, and then 7, 8, 9, 10, 4 verses about relative bodhicitta, including the instruction for Tonglen meditation practice. Part 3 is called Taking Adversity as the Path. This is a very central message. Adversity means life's difficulties. People difficulties, health difficulties, wealth difficulties, all of the stuff that life throws at us, that the world calls adversity, obstacles, difficulties. They will become the path. They become blessings. The enemy becomes the friend. The difficulty becomes the way you learn more than any other way. The difficulties become your number one teacher, because in this life, this is what you have to learn. The difficulties are thrown up by your karma. You, something deep inside you that's carrying on now, or was there from the past, whatever. That's our harmful karma from the past causes our adversities now. We have so much to learn from them. So how do we do that? We've got 4 subunits of 3 of 7. How to make it the path, how to use relative bodhicitta, how to use ultimate bodhicitta, and then special methods. That's part 3, taking adversity as the path. Point 4 is called a lifetime summary of all these teachings, all 59 points. We look at that in 2 ways. In life, it says what we're doing with all these 59 instructions is applying 5 powers. So we learn about 5 powers. And then at the time of death, we learn about what's called Mahayana Poa. Poa means, in this case, transferring to a much better life next time round. How do we use those 5 powers that we're cultivating in our life through mind training? How do we use them at death? To die in the very, very best way possible. And many of you will know over the last couple of years, 2, maybe 3 times, we've done dying as best one can training based on this subsection of part 4. We've looked at it in detail, how to apply it as we're on the way out, as death is very close, and in death itself. Number 5, it's called Gauge of Success. Maybe it's a bit early to apply that one, but it's to see how well our bodhisattva training is going. We have 4 verses there of instruction. And then point 6 and 7, you can separate them. Point 6 is called commitments. It's like what you've signed up for. It's your samaya, the rules of mind training, the rules for the bodhisattva. So we have verses 23 to 38 apply there. And then we've got the precepts or further guidance, verses 39 to 59. So really those last 2 points is a whole bunch of very, very hands-on advice about being and living as a bodhisattva. So there we should know these 7 points. Preliminaries, 2 bodhicittas, taking adversity as the path, the whole practice summed up over a lifetime, how we know if we're doing okay, the gauge of success, the commitments, and the precepts. So, there we are. I hope that diagram will be of use. It really is the whole thing in a nutshell. And then those 59 verses, please don't call them slogans. It's a horrid word. Slogans comes from the advertising world. We are not marketing mind training. We're not trying to sell it, online in real life. Slogan was coined by Trungpa Rinpoche. He was fascinated at playing with language. He wanted to capture people's attention. So it's up to you. Then we have nice words. We can call them maxims, for instance. That's a nice word, maxim. 59 maxim, 59 verses is good enough. Find a word that suits you, but these are profound, sacred guidance. It's not yeah man slogan, live according to that. It's not light. This the most famous formulation of all the Buddha's bodhisattva teachings has been put into 59 sacred verses of help for you and for me. It's beautiful, beautiful beyond words. So then, what's next? Well, the actual text. And I think then we have to stop for today. So if you go back to that mind map, you'll see you've got the 7 points as blue lozenges, and you've got sort of pale greeny lemon points for the beginning and the end. And so, like all texts, if we're thinking of the texts, when we study it, we have the good beginning, the good middle, and the good end. You can even upgrade good to the excellent beginning, and the excellent middle, and the excellent end. And some texts, the excellent beginning has quite a bit in it. First we look at the title, and we take the title apart, because titles are always meaningful. And then we have a homage to the Buddhas, homage to Bodhisattva, homage to Manjushri, and we look at the relevance of that, and so on. We've got the good beginning. Here, there barely isn't one. You've only got the title, so that is, we come to, oops. That one, okay. So the title is Mind Training as 7 Points. So it's in Tibetan, because it was a Tibetan text. Tekpa Chempo Lo Jong Dun Dunma Shukso. Tekpa Chempo means Mahayana. Lo means mind. Jong means, as I've explained, training, refining, purifying. Turn means point. Dun means 7. Dun Dunma means as 7 points. Shukso means is contained herein. So the title is herein is Mahayana mind refining in 7 points, 7-point mind training. Well, that's it. That's our good beginning. When we come to the excellent middle, which is the text itself, then we get the 7 points. And the first point in Tibetan says, Tampo Ngondro Dala Lap, which means, and you have it in your translation, first train in the preliminaries. At the end of our last course, where we'd spend, I forget how many, more than a dozen sessions in that wonderful text by Kamachami, we'd covered the Vajrayana version of the preliminaries. And so I sort of had a laugh at the end. So I said, when we come to this next text, mind training, the first point is just 4 words, first, or 5 words, first train in the preliminaries. You know, first do that. But when we look at what it is, then it's a lot. And it tells us train in it. It doesn't say study it. It doesn't say know what it's about. It says train yourself in it. And because we are now not in Vajrayana teachings, with the 4 special foundations and so on, we're in general bodhisattva teachings. And then the preliminaries are what are known as the 4 ways of changing the mind, sometimes simply called the 4 thoughts. But they're not here. 4 trainings, not 4 thoughts, 4 trainings, not things you need to know or know about, things you need to do. And the commentaries for Sechulbu's 7-point mind training, Atisha's 7-point mind training, mainly talk about the 4 ways of changing the mind. So we'll come back to those at the beginning of the next session. But that title, The 4 Ways of Changing the Mind, is really very, very, very good. Because you can't say you've trained in it first training in the preliminaries, until your mind's changed. Right? Imagine you change your bathroom, right? You've got an old-fashioned bath and everything's old and out of date. And you make a brand new bathroom with a walk-in shower and everything's been retiled, you know, the lot. You have to smash the old bathroom. And you've got workmen in making a lot of noise and a lot of mess. And then in the end, you've got your fantastic shower and it's all so beautiful and everything works. Your bathroom has changed. That's easy to understand, isn't it? You know, when it's the old bathroom, it's not changed. When it's a work in progress and there's dust and mess everywhere, it's changing. But it's only transformed. So we can say we've done the preliminaries of the 4 ways of changing the mind when our mind has changed. It's as simple as that. So, precious human opportunity. Whatever's in your life, however up or down, rich or poor, healthy or sick, catastrophe or success, whatever's going on in your karma, doesn't matter. When you wake up in the morning and you're still alive and you still have Dharma, you've not lost your mind, you've not lost interest. There's you and Dharma no matter what happens. You feel so happy. You could jump, you could dance. Your heart is full of joy. And not just when you wake up all day long. Then the first way of changing the mind has changed your mind. And until then, you need to work on it. And especially when you're feeling down in the dumps because you're not well, or because you just lost out on something, or life's treating you bad, you've got work to do. You've still got to train in the preliminaries. So precious human opportunity, when we really feel every moment of our life is precious. What a gift that you can't believe it, because there are trillions, billions of beings out there, the birds, the bees, the creepy crawly things, there are other human beings, 7 billion, 8 billion on this planet. There are all the, and then elsewhere in the cosmos, spirits, ghosts, all sorts of beings who just don't have what I've got today. You could cry. It's so wonderful that you have Dharma. You have some smart. You know what's going on. You're awakening to the truth of all of this, to what is divine, what is sublime. Then your mind is changed. Second one, impermanence. It's not just that you understood everything changes and so on. It's that you won't cling to anything or anyone anymore, because you know everything and everyone, and including you, your relative self, is changing all the time. You won't be nostalgic for the past. Past gone. They're totally gone, 100%. We carry some reproduction of it in our head. The real past has gone forever. Real future's not happened. So we don't cling to anyone or anything as though it's going to last, or because we need it, and all of that, because you understand impermanence. You understand the only thing that goes with you at death is your good karma and dharma, your dharma heart, your good heart, your awareness, your awakeness through meditation. So when you really know that and you don't cling to anybody or anything, then you've changed. Second preliminary. When you understand that you don't understand karma, but that it's going on all the time. Karma is not just an odd thing that happens, that, oh, that was his karma. Karma is about what's happening to you and everybody else that you witness all the time. It's the play of karma. And to understand that only Buddha understands it, and even very great bodhisattvas don't get all of it. Understanding karma is profound. It's as complicated and as deep as life is itself. I mean, look at what happens in physics, in biology, as we understand what's going on materially. It's amazingly profound and wonderful. Not to mention the mind power, the karma that's driving it all. So when we still need to train in karma, cause and effect, and then suffering, really understanding suffering, not just suffering as results that we witness, but suffering as causes that we witness. People having a good time, making bad karma, and so on. The existential suffering of being divorced from our beautiful Buddha nature. We have a long way to go, so we need to train as a basis. We need to be working on those things. Never think I've done that. If you think I've done the foundations, the four ordinary foundations, you are deceiving yourself. They just get deeper and deeper and more meaningful the more we progress in our meditation practice. So there we finish for today. And anything that was good and helpful and useful, please let's now dedicate for everyone's benefit. Let's not cling to it. Let's give it away. Let it go beautifully, hoping, praying it really helps everybody. May whatever virtue was created by our session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained. By the main enemy, our mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every being become free from the ocean of existence, troubled by its waves of rebirth, aging, sickness, and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not arisen. In those in whom it has arisen, may its development know no setbacks, and may it increase ever more and more. Through our virtue, may we quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. So thank you, and just to remind you of what I said, I think before the recorded session started, we meet again for the continuation of the 7-point mind training teachings next week. Normally the first Saturday of each month is reserved for Tonglen training, but because Tonglen belongs to 7-point mind training, then I thought it would be good for the Tonglen group also to participate, remind themselves of what we're doing in our ongoing Tonglen training, where it comes from, what it belongs to. So that's it. That's my first session. I'm always a bit nervous about first sessions, getting the thing off the ground. It's like taking off in an aeroplane. It's where everyone's clutching the seat a little bit. So now it's over to you for your contributions, your comments, or your questions. And just to let you know, if you're not a regular of my teachings, this bit goes on YouTube as audio, but not with the video. So you'll be heard. So I need to tell you that you've been warned. Anything you say may appear on YouTube, and but not your image.
Ken, thank you very much for that. It's really quite timely. I've just been looking back at the notes that you gave us for these teachings back at Samya Ling in, I think it was 2016, in the New Year one. But it's really good to go to revise it. I'm going to be away over the next few weekends, so I'll have to catch up on YouTube, but just wanted to say thank you, and we'll be looking forward to following this through again and kind of making new sense of the previous teachings. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Ken. That was really wonderful. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
You're welcome, Mike. You're welcome.
Yeah, Ken, it was 10 years ago that you taught this in South Africa as a 9-day retreat.
Yeah.
And I've such special memories of it. And it's wonderful to now revisit it and just, you're giving even more detail now on the history. And it's just so lovely to take it in again freshly. And I'm looking back at my old notes, and it's, just really.
That was a great retreat. I really loved it. TRC.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we did then, and maybe what we won't be doing so much now, is actually sitting together, because we had all day long it was 9 days, was it, the retreat? I think something like that, yeah. So we had sitting sessions, practice sessions, as well as the instruction. So I not really thought it out, but I don't think we'll be doing so much sitting during this course. It's more giving people the information they need to go away and sit themselves.
Sorry, Ken, it was just a very quick point as well. The thing that I found, I think, the most useful, I don't know if it's helpful to people who may be new to this, in the time has been the idea of taking adversity as the opportunity to practice this. I've certainly found had a lot of experiences in the last 10 years really, which have really highlighted that, and in which, when I've remembered trying to kind of take that attitude to difficulties and problems and losses and that kind of thing, it's been of real practical help. So I've actually found real, it's not just theory, it's really important practical benefits from it. And I just wanted to highlight that if anybody's got any doubts.
Thank you. It's so true. It's so true. And if you're well used to Buddhism, if you're kind of a Buddhist pickle, like you've been in the jar for a long time and maturing in the Buddhist juice, then when the adversity comes, then you say, then this is where the practice really starts. But there's one thing, and I take advantage of what you said, is some people, when they're down, for whatever reason, psychologically or just physically very depleted, they think, I'm not good enough to practice now. It's like, if I practice in this state, it's not fit as an offering to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Do you see what I mean? Like, if practice is sacred, I need to make at least a minimum basic good job of it. And just now, the way my mind is, no way. I'll wait till I'm feeling a bit better to practice, as though, whereas what we see in mind training, and it's a point I have to come back to again and again, because it is what it says. It's training your mind, and although we think about the whole world and serving, taking the suffering of everybody, when it comes down to the bottom line, it's about transforming, refining, purifying our own mind. And those are the times, the best times, the most important times to do the practice, even if you can only manage one mantra, even if it's one kind thought and you're exhausted, to bring the mind back to practice is when you don't feel good enough for it or up to it, is just so important. And that's really very true for some people I know. They just don't feel worthy enough to practice or well enough to practice. But and I give you an example from my own life. From the age of 6 to sometime in my 40s, I had very violent migraines. 2-3 days, dark room, screaming with pain, this kind of thing. It's really serious. And the pain was so much that even though I was a 7-point mind trainer, even though I was a Tonglener, sometimes the pain's so much you can't think of anything else. You can't. It's 100% absorbing. But there was this magic time when I'd pull myself back to remembering, remembering you're human. There's not just pain filling up 100%. You're human, you're Buddhist. And if only through this pain, if only I could take away some other people's pain, if only I could give them something helpful and positive, even just for one thought, and it would turn the whole migraine around. It wouldn't take away the pain. It wouldn't take away lots of things. But all of a sudden, it was a quantum shift. And, they say pain and suffering aren't the same things, or difficulty and suffering. Difficulty and pain, we have no choice. It's karma. You can't stop your karma from hitting you. But whether that makes us suffer or not, suffering's in our hand. Not at the beginning, of course, we're training. But whether, and what we're learning to do, is not to suffer when there is adversity. And you can only do that hands-on. You can't sit down when everything's good and you're sweet and life's going well and nature's beautiful, and there you are, meditating on a hillside. You can't do taking adversity as the path meditation then. You haven't got it. Something we need to learn to do when it's happening. Anyway, we'll be coming back to that in point 3, taking adversity as the path.
And I just, with these teachings also, it's so wonderful to be reminded that there are so many ways of approaching practice. And I found at different times in my life, some practices have been so what I connected with. And for example, Torah practice, I loved it so much. And I didn't think that I would ever not be doing Torah every day. But then circumstances changed and it just became very difficult for me. And it's so wonderful to be reminded, I feel quite tearful even saying this, of how rich the teachings are and how many there are and how many, to hear the story of Atisha and to hear just to be reminded of how people literally gave their lives or risked their lives in order to get the teachings or make them available and what they went through in order to gift us and how deeply precious it is. And I think when I first encountered the Dhamma, there was a sense of something very, very precious. But it's like you say, the more we go over those four transformations, the more profound they really become. And yeah, it's just what you're giving here is so beautiful in coming back to those basics, but also in reminding that there really is so much that we can move with and be flexible where we need to. So thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. My own inspirations was 16th Karmapa when he was alive, and Akon Rinpoche, and the great masters in Tibetan history, and my own other teachers, very great famous lamas. They always come back to these 4. And the Wonkya lamas, they're always up in the high altitude stuff, they're always Dzogchen Mahamudra, the 4 yogas of Mahamudra, and all of that. I mean, it's kind of good teachings, and let's not get too specific. But like 16th Karmapa, who was like Buddha on earth every moment of every day, to hear him actually say, it's been quoted a lot, I'm just a monk. I mean, how he felt, I'm just a monk, I'm a follower of the Buddha, learning to get out of suffering. That basic feeling was so extraordinary, because then, you go in, there'd be a Vajra crown ceremony, he'd sit there being Chinrezig, the whole room would be like hair on end people having a life-changing experience. And then I'd drive him somewhere and he'd just plonk himself down on the ground in the dirt somewhere and say, I'm just a monk. And that humility, simplicity. If we want to learn to be a bodhisattva, we've got to learn to be nobody. It's beautiful, isn't it? And it's such a relief. It takes so much effort to carry on being somebody. especially if you're a somebody, you know, and you've got other people's eyes on you all the time. Anyway. Is this the goodbye for now silence? And see you next week. Okay. Have a really good week, and hope to see you next week.
Ta very much, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Oh.
And hello and goodbye to those I didn't say hello to in person at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.